This is an NBC News special report.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Jarrett alongside Joe Fryer here in New York. We have breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack within Israel's borders overnight. First, launching rockets from the Gaza Strip, then sending militants into the streets of the southern part of Israel. Hundreds of people have been injured. Several have been killed, but that number could be much higher. You are looking at live pictures there.
Let's go right to NBC's Raf Sanchez, who is in the south of Israel. Raf, good morning. What is the latest where you are?
Joe, Laura, good morning. Israelis woke up today to find their worst nightmares had come true in the form of a massive surprise attack by Palestinian militants from Gaza. As we speak, Palestinian gunmen are inside Israeli cities and towns, something we have never before seen on this scale, and they are fighting running gun battles against Israeli ground forces. Hamas, the major Palestinian militant group that controls Gaza, says they have taken Israelis hostage, and they have taken them back inside of Gaza. Now, the Israeli military says this infiltration came by land, by sea, and by air in the form of Hamas gunmen on paragliders infiltrating into Israeli territory, and this was done under the cover of a barrage of more than 2,000 rockets fired in the early hours of this Shabbat morning. Guys, I wanted just to explain to you what the scene is where we are right now. We are on one of the major highways in southern Israel. You would expect this road to be full on a holiday weekend, and instead you can see behind me, this is an Israeli military checkpoint. Israeli forces here are searching all cars that are going past because they do not know at this point where these Palestinian gunmen are, and they are afraid these gunmen may try to be getting north towards Tel Aviv, towards Jerusalem. As we've been here, we have seen just a stream of Israeli special forces driving south towards the Gaza border, and they are heading to confront those gunmen in the towns and cities in the south. Guys.
Rob, just an incredible scene playing out there, the idea of armed gunmen going in. Can you tell us more about the paragliders?
We have never seen anything like this before, Laura. When Hamas has tried to get into southern Israel previously, they have done it sometimes through underground tunnels under the border. They have done it sometimes in small boats going out into the Mediterranean and then back onto the Israeli shoreline. This morning, for the first time, they crossed by air in paragliders. It is not clear how many of them, but these are armed, highly trained Hamas militants landing by air, catching the Israeli state completely by surprise. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed his people earlier today, and he said Israel is at war. This is above and beyond those rounds of fighting that the world has got used to over the last decade, where we see Israel and Hamas fighting for 72 hours a week. This is on a much, much bigger scale. There is at this point no official word on death tolls, but the videos we are seeing are absolutely harrowing, showing bodies, what appear to be bodies of both Israeli soldiers and civilians. And this is a country right now that is bracing for the absolute worst. Guys.
Raf, do we have any idea how many of these attackers have infiltrated Israel?
Joe, it's a really good question, and I asked the Israeli military earlier. They would not say, but just judging by the number of locations, at this moment there is fighting, the most recent information we have, at least 5 locations across southern Israel. That suggests that we are looking at squads in large numbers. I asked the Israeli military, are we talking dozens? Are we talking hundreds? They would not say. What they were prepared to say is that Israeli fighter jets are in action right now. We have been seeing them in the skies across southern Israel. They are striking targets inside of Gaza, trying to stop this barrage of rocket fire. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, there's an ambulance just coming past us now. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says what is going on right now in terms of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza is only the beginning of what will be a major, major Israeli retaliation. But, guys, the priority for the Israeli military right now is to regain control of these cities where there are still Israeli civilians inside, and nobody at this point knows the scale of the death toll.
Right,
Guys.
that's got to be the first priority, obviously, Raph. Do we have a sense of exactly how many people were taken? I know you told us that they were going across the border, making sure, obviously, that no more people are taken essentially as hostages. Do we know at all right now?
Laura, there is no more sensitive piece of information in Israel right now than how many people have been taken hostage, how many are alive, or how many are dead. The Israeli government, the nation of Israel, will go to enormous lengths to get its people back, whether they are live civilians, whether they are dead soldiers. And the scale of the Israeli response will be determined by how many Israelis are inside of Gaza right now. If there are civilians in large numbers there, we may see a situation where the Israeli government feels it has no choice. Laura, we're just hearing the air defense going off here. There's no sirens at the moment, so we're good. I'm going to keep talking to you. But this is just a very live situation. You can see Israeli forces on the ground behind me. Behind my camera operator, Dave Copeland, there's actually smoke from where a rocket hit earlier on. But depending on the number of Israeli civilians who are inside of Gaza, that will determine the scale of the Israeli response. And it may very well be that the government of Israel feels it has no choice but to mount some kind of large-scale ground offensive into Gaza in the densely populated cities of Khan Yunis, of Gaza City, where there are so many civilians among these Palestinian militants. And it is a situation like that we have already seen what appears to be a very serious loss of life this morning. But an Israeli ground invasion inside of Gaza could take this death toll to a whole new level. So everyone in this region is holding their breaths right now. Guys.
Raph Sanchez, you and your team continue to stay safe. We'll let you go for now, but we will be checking back with you later this morning.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, let's bring in NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. He is on the phone with us. Richard, good morning. Your first reaction to this news?
Well, I think that Hamas and Israel are at war, and I think this is going to escalate into a more significant conflict over the next several hours, over the next several days. This is unprecedented, as Raph was saying. We've seen violence from the Palestinians. We've seen attacks from Gaza into Israel, but not this scale, where you're having potentially dozens of militants flying in on hang gliders and coming in by the sea and crossing in by land, presumably by tunnels or holes in the border fence. And the fact that they are still engaged in running battles in multiple locations in southern Israel is something that will be shocking to the Israeli people. I know that several of the airports and transit points into Israel are already facing delays or cancellations. The country is on alert. Israel said that it is now on war footing. We've heard from Hamas. They have acknowledged this operation. There have been some videos that have come out as well showing gunmen dressed in black preparing for this commando-style raid. And they say that it is retaliation for Israeli actions in Jerusalem, for Israeli actions around the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. So we've seen this tension. This is an old tension where there's buildup of tension, and the Palestinians will launch an attack in order to punish the Israelis from their perspective for excesses and atrocities. But we haven't seen something like this level of sophistication, and to catch the Israelis off guard, and then to keep this operation moving for hours now. This began at dawn. It is already afternoon in Israel, so this has been going on for multiple hours now. I think it's very likely that we're going to see an escalation in some sort of small-scale war, maybe a bigger-scale war between Hamas and Israel, and I think we're in the early phases of that right now.
Richard, talk to us about that surprise factor. You know, Israelis have some of the best military intelligence anywhere. How does something like this happen?
Well, they don't have a lot of visibility inside Gaza. Now, Gaza itself, they have lots of intelligence, but clearly it wasn't as good. But Gaza is a place that is run by the Palestinians. We're talking about an area that is more or less closed off. It's often compared to the biggest prison in the world. We're talking just over 2 million people that live there, Gaza City being the biggest population center, very densely populated. And the Israelis They have informants, they have intelligence, but they don't live there. They don't patrol there. There are no Israeli settlers there. This is an area that is locked off, that is run by Hamas, and the Israelis would prefer to forget about the place and not have anything to do with it. But what happened is Hamas is in charge. Hamas is very militant, very organized. They've been looking for the leader of Hamas, Mohammed Deif, for years. He's the one who personally announced this operation. So this, from Hamas's point of view, is an enormous coup to carry out a sophisticated surprise attack like this. Israeli officials have said Hamas made a huge mistake because it's going to bring an enormous reprisal.
All right. Richard Engel, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your reporting and your context on this. We want to go back to Raf Sanchez, who is in the south of Israel. Raf, what is it you are seeing and hearing right now?
So, Joe, there is just so much activity around us. A convoy of Israeli special forces just drove past, sirens on, heading south. And the fact, as Richard was saying, this attack began hours ago. It is now 1:10 in the afternoon. The fact that we are still seeing Israeli reinforcements flooding to the south shows you that the Israeli military does not yet have a grip on this situation. This is not something that we are used to seeing. It is normally the Israelis who are confident, who are in control, but they seem to have been caught completely off guard here. Caught off guard in a way that we have not seen Israel surprised in exactly 50 years. You have to go back to October 1973, the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was surprised by a combined Egyptian-Syrian military assault. That was a war where, in the first days, people in this country really thought it might be the end of Israel. And there is, obviously, I wasn't here in 1973, but you were hearing those comparisons on the Israeli radio, and there is just a state of shock in this country that they could have been caught so off guard. Something else we've been seeing on the road, the truck has moved away now, but we just saw a truck carrying a battery of Israeli Iron Dome missile interceptors. This is this highly sophisticated Israeli air defense system developed with support from the United States. It is the backbone of Israel's defenses. It is what Israel relies on to protect its civilians from this rocket fire from Gaza. But whatever happened in the early hours of this morning, the Iron Dome was not able to stop this barrage. The Israeli military says it was more than 2,000 rockets fired. And, Joe, we have just seen plumes of smoke all across southern Israel where these rockets landed, on homes, on warehouses. And there is just a sense of disbelief at what is happening right now. Guys.
Raf, do you have a sense of, was there a failure of the defense system, of the Iron Dome, or was it that they were just getting hit in so many different ways at all at once? You just can't prepare for something like that.
It's a really good question, Laura. We asked the Israeli military earlier, was this an intelligence failure? How is it, on almost to the day, the 50th anniversary of the 1973 war, that Israel could be surprised again and on such a scale? And I will tell you, the Israeli military spokesman said it's a good question. He declined to answer it, but he said that there is going to be a lot of time to ask very hard, very probing questions about what happened here. But right now, their priority is this live firefight going on in cities to the south of me, and potentially a massive hostage rescue operation, both inside of Israeli cities, but potentially inside of Gaza as well. Guys.
Raf, this is an area that is familiar with conflict. Help us understand, put into context what's happening right now, how that fits into the historical context of conflict in the region.
Yeah, so we have seen rounds of fighting between Hamas militants in Gaza and the Israeli military almost on a yearly basis, going back to sort of 2008, 2009. Major war in 2014. There was another major war in May 2021, not on the same scale. What is happening today is just a different order of magnitude. Normally, the fighting in these situations takes place inside of Gaza, with the exception of the rocket fire on Israeli cities. What is happening right now is the fighting is on the Israeli side of the border, and that is not something we have ever seen on this scale before. Just to give you a little more historical context, during that war in 2014, one Israeli soldier Excuse me, going back into the early 2000s, one Israeli soldier, a young man named Gilad Shalit, was captured by Hamas militants. He was taken inside of Gaza. He was held for years there, and Israel, unable to rescue him by force, was ultimately forced to release more than 1,000 Palestinian militants to secure him. And that gives you a sense of the value Israel places on the lives of its people. It is hard to overstate what a crisis it is if there are multiple, dozens potentially, of Israeli civilians being held inside Gaza, and it is hard to overstate the urgency with which Israel feels it will need to respond to a crisis on this scale. Guys.
All right, Raph, stay safe there. We are going to come back to you regularly throughout the morning. We want to turn now to our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, joining us by phone. Andrea, good morning to you. I imagine this was not what you thought you would wake up to on a Saturday morning. Talk to us about the larger historical context. We heard there from Raph, it is the 50th anniversary of that other awful surprise attack back in 1973. Set the scene for us, if you will.
Well, Raph is exactly right. This is so unprecedented. We've had the skirmishes before and outbreaks. I was there in 2021, but there was always a trigger, something that happened. And then it was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a holy site to the Palestinians and to all Arabs, in fact, where there had been a trigger, in each of these instances, in the intifadas, the first, second, and third intifada in the West Bank. But Gaza is different. Gaza has always been, as Richard and Rolf were saying, a place, a no man's land, really, for Israelis. And there have been these incidents before. The U.S. in the past, secretaries of state, Hillary Clinton in 2009, intervened, went there, negotiated a solution, but it was always small scale. Small scale, though, was always major to Israelis. Israelis take this, so seriously, and this is beyond anything that we've ever seen before. And it is on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which is something that people were holding conferences here. I was at one in New York on Thursday at the Council on Foreign Relations with the former Israeli Prime Minister and other officials from both countries and some of my journalist colleagues. So it was always an academic exercise on the anniversaries of the Yom Kippur War, never anything like this. And again, there was a lot of tension growing in the West Bank and elsewhere in the country, because of growing friction between the Palestinians and the Israelis, because of the most right-wing coalition, Netanyahu's coalition, possibly taking more land, because of the settlement conflicts. But that was in the West Bank. Gaza has been something that Israel, as Richard Engel was saying, would prefer to ignore because it is ungovernable. And it's always been a tragedy from the Palestinian perspective. And there's this division between Hamas, which runs Gaza, which has always been the most radical of the Palestinians. The other piece of this is that there has been really no Palestinian strong leadership for many, many years. No negotiations really between the Palestinians and the Israelis since 2014. And they have been, tentatively talking, intensive negotiations actually, which haven't reached anything other than a framework for a very different kind of resolution of the Israeli-Arab situation between the Saudis and Israel, recognition by Saudi Arabia and Israel, which people in Israel have been saying, and some in the Netanyahu coalition, Netanyahu himself has been saying would be the end of friction in this region, something that hard right members of the coalition have opposed. But that's the kind of thing that has been discussed at the UN when we were there just a few weeks ago. Nothing has been contemplated like this. The surprise aspect of this is also shocking. You've been talking about the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome has been, virtually impenetrable. There have always been one or two stray rockets, but nothing on the scale of this. And as Rolf was saying, back when one Israeli soldier was held for many, many years, 1,000 Palestinians were turned over when negotiations to try to get them out failed. They never forget. They never leave anyone behind. And here, when you have potentially soldiers as well as civilians, and all Israelis serve in the military, all except the most religious group of Israelis have required military service, men and women, for decades. Well, the entire country will be, completely seized with this. This is not something that will divide Israelis. There will be an investigation as to how they failed to see it coming, and there will be political ramifications from this. But this comes after a period of a full year of full, angry divisions involving the military, former intelligence, protests against the Netanyahu government, the coalition government. That was over judicial reform. That was over democratic principles. Nothing like this, though, could happen without uniting the Israeli citizenry. And so how did this happen? Aspects of it will come much later. This is, as Netanyahu says, war, and there's no real Palestinian leadership in Gaza, no communication with any of them in order to have negotiations to try to resolve this. This will have to be resolved, and the Americans will have to get into it. This is something that the State Department and the National Security Council are going to have to address immediately, because they cannot see America's closest ally and the only real democracy in the Middle East overwhelmed. The relationship between Israel and the United States is so critical.
Right. All right, Andrea Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us early this morning. We really do appreciate it. We do want to go back to Raf Sanchez one more time and check in with him. Raf, do we have an idea, this surprise attack by Hamas, what the objective is here? Is it terror? Is it to get territory? Are we hearing anything about why this is happening and why it's happening now?
Yeah, Joe, so we have heard an official statement from what Hamas calls its military wing earlier, and they say that this is retaliation for the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. They say that this is retaliation for what has been happening at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. That is the third holiest site in Islam. It's known as the Temple Mount to Jews. It's the holiest site in Judaism. It is one of the most combustible, incendiary spots in this entire geopolitical region. And they say that this is an act of revenge for what they see as decades and decades of Israeli occupation and mistreatment of the Palestinian people. Now, to the Israeli government, to the Israeli people, this is very clearly an act of terrorism, that these are armed Hamas gunmen going into civilian areas, firing rockets at cities and at towns all across southern Israel. And they say they will treat this as terrorism. Just to give you a sense of the activity here, you have behind me, these are Israeli border police. They are manning this checkpoint. They are making sure that none of these gunmen are able to hide in cars and head back further into Israel. And then over this way, you can see there are at least 5 ambulances behind me. And guys, every couple of minutes, more and more Israeli reinforcements are speeding to the south through this checkpoint, heading down towards Gaza. We just a moment ago saw an Israeli armored vehicle mounting the sidewalk here, driving around a police car and absolutely flying to the south. You can see these are members of the Israeli border police who are just walking past me now. This is an all-hands-on-deck situation. The Israeli military is calling up thousands and thousands of reservists as they try, first of all, as an absolute top priority, to clear these Hamas militants out of these southern cities and then begin to strike back inside of Gaza. Guys.
All right, Raf, we are going to come back to you soon. Stay safe out there. Our thanks to you and your team. We will have much more coming up this morning on Saturday Today and throughout the day on the networks of NBC and NBCnews.com.
For now, we're going to return to your regularly scheduled programming. Have a good morning.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.